So, all right, go ahead and pot him up. Tony, you there?
I'm here.
All right.
Hey, guys.
There we go. Okay. So let's rewind. Let's go back to zero. And so here we are. Let's pretend chat room like this never happened, that we planned to do it on the phone the whole time.
I like it. Perfect.
Yeah. I'll just wipe out the past. It happens all the time in America. So George Kliavkoff, threw out some bombs today, taking grenades and all that stuff about the Big 12. What did he say that had merit, and what was defensive and maybe trying to bail water?
So I thought there were a couple things. First of all, this is a side piece, but the majority of what he talked about was literally, I thought he was like quoting Craig Dragon. The stuff that he said about NIL, the stuff that he said about the sport and the games and the importance of school and, balancing to not just sort of become professional leagues and all that was, especially for you folks in the chat room. I mean, that's exactly the kind of stuff that you guys talk about all the time. Mm-hmm. Second, he fired a couple shots. There are a couple of things that I thought we should point out. First of all, Brett Yormark and George Kliavkoff are friends, so it would not surprise me in the least if he went backstage and had a text from Brett Yormark that was a fire emoji and a shopping cart emoji.
Yeah,
because they're friends. I mean that's there's an element of that when you get folks on that level that you kind of have. But what I think is also important is he did something that I think was important. You guys talk a lot about that Bob Bowlesby did last year, which is to really sort of shoot out the gun to say, hold on, we're not just taking this laying down. We are in this game and we are standing up to baloney. I think that there's an understanding that a lot of the baloney that's going on right now is stuff from like the Twitterati of like Iowa State and Kansas State, more so than actually anything that matters. But I think it's important for them to actually stand up a little bit to that. So that's where, he had the line about, the line about with respect to the Big 12 being open for business. I appreciate that. We haven't decided whether we're going shopping there or not yet. And let's be honest, guys. That line was written by a sassy intern.
It was, definitely.
It was written by a sassy, fabulous intern in their office in San Francisco who probably couldn't tell you which sports ball game was going on, but is great at writing those types of things. And that kid should get a raise, whoever they are. Probably some kid from Stanford. It might have been written by the Stanford tree, for all we know. So I would say keep that in mind. He pointed out, which I thought was kind of important and powerful for the conference to hear. A lot of your audience is hearing this in terms of like a Big 12 mindset. Think about it just like what you guys needed to hear from Bob Bowlesby last year. The Pac-12 needed to hear this from him today. They needed to hear our folks are in this together. And he actually challenged him. He said, if you don't think we're in this together, take it to the president. One of the things that I've sort of been hearing, because I'm looking at stuff from lots of different angles that I hear kind of a little more than a lot of your folks here, is that with a lot of the Pac-12 presidents, what they're terrified of is if they lose Oregon and Washington and Stanford, for example, then they're in trouble. And so then something like, a bunch of them shifting over to the Big 12 might be a great idea. But I think the Big 12 leaders and the Pac-12 leaders would ideally like to keep their conferences manageable. I mean, they're talked about we should have some kind of, we'll call it a joint venture. We won't use the A word anymore. Mm-hmm. We won't call it an alliance, but something where they could work together, doing something like that. I think there's a lot of possibilities, but a lot of it's going to depend on Notre Dame. It's going to depend on the Big Ten. It's going to depend on Oregon and Washington. His comment, I don't know if you guys said the actual words. I pull up his transcript here. He said, I've been spending 4 weeks trying to defend against grenades that have been lobbed in from every corner of the Big 12, trying to destabilize our remaining conference. I understand why they're doing that. When you look at the relative media value between the two conferences, I get it. I get why they're scared, why they're trying to destabilize it. I was just tired of that. And then he kind of laughed and said, probably not the most collegial thing I've ever said. He's sort of like right there he's making peace with them. Now, you notice he's saying from every corner of the Big 12. What that's sort of implying is probably not as much Yormark as it is, again, all these sort of yahoos. A lot of you guys have talked about media values and stuff. I mean, we could do a whole thing on this. Do not listen to a BYU dentist with a Google sheet trying to interpret, extensive media financial valuations. Like, these people do not know what they're talking about. A lot of times when they're putting up numbers, they're not apples to apples numbers. They're looking at Big 12 projections, for example, that include things like NCAA basketball money, basketball media value, college football playoff money, and all that stuff that adds on. And then they look at just an initial ESPN low bid offer on the Pac-12 media market, and they start to dance around because that's fun. So I would try to keep that in mind a little bit because it is not apples to apples.
No, and I wonder how much of this, and look, you gave us a chart about the real TV values of each program. And my alma mater was still number one on the ones that we had.
Number one?
Yeah. Of the ACC and Big 12 and Pac-12, the leftovers, the ones that haven't jumped leagues, so OU, Texas, USC, and UCLA moved out of that. And there's a lot more factors when it comes to TV ratings than just maybe the overall numbers for a certain broadcast, because channel matters, time matters, those 100%. Things matter.
And they matter a lot more. So I'm actually, I don't know if you guys know the YouTuber D1360 is awesome. This guy named Ryan in Chicago, who's kind of become a friend of mine. We've been talking actually about, we're trying to do some better TV analysis data. So I'll tell you, I've done actually some pretty deep regression dives into 5 years of TV data. And the number one determinant of how many people are watching a game has nothing to do with the teams that are on. It's about channel. So the channel is going to always pick a good game. And, my uncle's going to watch it. Probably whatever's on ABC, he's going to watch it. I mean, they're not putting on, Sam Houston State versus Ball State on the, big noon kickoff, right? So there's some chicken or the egg because they're putting on the good game. But what matters more than anything else is the game, just the channel that it's on, and then the importance of the game. How important are the teams? Are they ranked? Are they winning? And stuff like that. This argument between this nasty argument between fan bases is dumb because you're talking about maybe 10% of the impact on viewership. It's not a lot. And so the TV viewership is really determined more than anything else, again, by the channel that it's on and the game. Now, then you get, somebody like Ohio State, they'll have a big impact actually because there's a lot of people. But for most of these teams, there's really very little impact. The difference between Baylor and Cal is not much.
Well,
as far as it's driven by the school, I think.
Well, yeah, and it was kind of interesting that the charts that you sent and the things where if you look at number one and then all the way down to number 40 or whatever it was, the difference wasn't a million total people. It was in 150,000 maybe throughout. There's not these big gaps. So these whales that people maybe think they're hunting for aren't really out there.
They're all minnows. They're all just minnows. The difference is minnows. And there are other elements of that go into it. And I'll tell you another big element that we sort of found is what else is on? This is why they talk about Pac-12 After Dark being really valuable because there's not other things on. But the other thing that I was actually talking to a guy who's done some extensive work in media stuff with this. But what's really, really valuable to the networks is the games that tons of people watch. This is why USC, Texas, Ohio State, have huge values because a lot of advertisers like Budweiser or whatever are trying to reach all kinds of people. So they don't want to I'm watching games all day, right? So I might see the same ad 10 different times. Well, they don't want me to see the ad 10 times. They want my mom and my grandma and my aunt and my cousin to all see that ad, and so they want to pay extra for a certain for the Michigan Ohio State game so that everybody can see it. Another thing that plays a role in this that nobody talks about, because again we're all sort of trying to crunch stupid data that we have a lot of times that we see or that BYU Dennis put on Twitter, but we don't understand also media valuations matter. So I'll tell you guys something kind of funny. I don't know if you guys probably don't know this, a lot of your folks. The Ivy League has a deal with ESPN Plus that is stupidly lucrative for how few people watch it. The reason is that the people that want to watch Princeton versus Dartmouth in football or lacrosse, it's not a lot of people. But those people are really, really attractive advertising targets. So if you're JP Morgan Chase private client banking services, like, and you're trying to like advertise to people like, funny. So guys, I went to the University of Pennsylvania for grad school. And we get the alumni magazine. They have the silliest ads. Well, they're not silly. I guess they're real, but they say things like, "Are your children ready to manage their trust fund? We can help." Like, that's they want to advertise to people that get that stuff, that want that, and so there's enormous value in it. So like SMU is probably a very attractive advertising space because like people that want to watch SMU football can like afford jewelry or whatever you're trying to advertise. And we as fans, when we're just sort of like trying to prove our team is all cool and looking at data from BYU Dennis on Twitter, we're not actually thinking about any of that at all.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's interesting, just being in radio as long as I have, sports radio over the air, radio does not traditionally, outside of a few markets like Nashville and Dallas and places that are kind of upside down when it comes to those things, get ratings because the rating system is dumb. It doesn't make sense. But what sports radio usually has is people who are college educated, own homes and all that. So when you go to advertise, you can tell them, and I'll tell advertisers anyone watching now, the people who watch this show are super smart and successful. So advertise with us. I can doing that in real time, but that's the sales pitch. And that's not, that's why the Ivy League has that deal. So it's true that way across the board. People don't really know that because most of the time the commercials you see are for McDonald's and everybody eats at McDonald's,
Exactly.
There's no price point there. They just want people to come through. They don't care how much money you make because they're price pointed to where everybody can go eat there.
Totally. And that's just something that we just don't realize, again, as fans, like, and this is why, I try to put out some of the stuff to help folks understand, like, hey, this stuff is not what we all think. And I try to give, you guys can go on my Twitter page and get, like, a lot of stuff that is trying to be, like, just data for you guys to then see and understand about your team. I'll also tell you one thing I've noticed that was sort of seeing stuff today that's very different. The Baylor fans, and there's a lot of them, their attitude towards this whole realignment thing seems to be like, hey, if there's this is sort of generalizing and everybody's different, but the Baylor attitude from fans seems to be like, hey, if the Pac-12 goes down a problematic road, we want to be here and grab some of these awesome schools that might need a place to be. The Iowa State and Kansas State people want to like burn the West Coast with torches. And so I think it's maybe, I don't know, is it because they applied and didn't get in, whereas Baylor didn't really want to go? I don't know. There's probably a lot of reasons. But I think that's the difference is that, like, a lot of your fans are Baylor fans just because I see them on Twitter and they're awesome folks. And they're not like this nasty, like you're seeing people be like, death to Pac. Like, it's like, guys, what did they ever do to hurt you? Your problems are in Birmingham and Bristol. They're not. They're definitely not in San Francisco.
No. I do think there is some, and we got to go here in a second, but there is some synergy between what Washington State and Oregon State are going through now and what Iowa State and Kansas State, and to an extent Baylor, for sure, Oklahoma State, we're all going through last year. In that, okay, like, if it's about all these things that, you can't make Manhattan or Ames or Waco or Stillwater all of a sudden a big market. Like, you can't just do that. Like, you can be like, well, more people need to watch here. You can't, like, the mayor of Waco can't, I could have him on. His name's Dylan Meek. I could have Dylan on right now, and he could be like, please, when Baylor's on television, all of you have to watch it so that we get a huge number. But you can't do that.
No, and I'll tell you also, one of the things that I find frustrating that I notice I'm hearing a lot of people say is people talk about, like, the markets, like, just of where that school is. But, like, if you think about, like, FSU or, like, Miami, like, FSU grads are all throughout Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, like, is it the Tallahassee market? No, it's not the Tallahassee market. It's Tallahassee and it's Tampa and it's Miami. Like, there's Florida State fans all over there. And, I mean, and the same thing is true, like, okay, Waco might be small, but how many Baylor grads stay in Waco versus how many Baylor grads go to Houston and Dallas? Like, one of the things, it's probably tons, I would think. Like, there's overlap. And that's one of the things about the Big 12 is the Big 12 lost Texas and A&M, which is very painful because a lot of viewers, are tied to those places. But the Big 12 is still owns Texas, is still all over Texas. The Texas Tech fans are all over Texas. They're not. It's not that Lubbock is small because Texas Tech fans and Texas Tech viewers are in Dallas and Austin and Houston.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Tony, after today and what George Kliavkoff said, and Brett Yormark will certainly have some sort of response to it.
Retort. I can't wait for it. I think I'm here. I'm totally living for it. I think it's gonna be great.
So, where is the Pac-12 realistically in this? Like, do you feel like they're still running scared, or is this the kind of, like you said earlier, this is just let's pause for a second and we're all getting our ducks in a row?
I think it's where pause will get our ducks in a row. I mean, so I joke with folks. They say, "Hey guys, the sun did rise, the sun did set, and Arizona sure ain't off to Texas yet." Of course, that could change in 5 minutes. But one of the issues that I think we are forgetting is that the presidents don't really want to have to go. And remember, thinking about government and thinking about higher education. If they can avoid making a change, like a giant catastrophic change in something, they're going to avoid doing that. Same thing with the Big 12 presidents who liked the conference they had and put it back together, which is awesome. I think they're going to try to do that. The problem is if Stanford, Oregon, Washington, Cal go somewhere else, then all of a sudden you're talking about a different game. And I think that's where the idea of, okay, here's what we do if, and I would say it's not like plan A, plan B. People don't think of it as like, particularly the Big 12 fans, don't think of it as a bad thing. Think of it as a contingency thing. The best thing for the Big 12, actually, I think, is to have more conferences, because the Big 12, you don't want to be like the permanent JV conference. Instead, you want to be part of the big club. And so I think strategically, the Big 12 is best off if the Pac-12 succeeds and thrives. And the funny thing is, by the way, that is exactly what the Pac-12 and the ACC very loudly said last year about the Big 12. Jim Phillips especially, he was like, and George Kliavkoff as well, both said, we want the Big 12 to succeed, and a successful Big 12 is important for college sports, and it's important for our conferences. And I think that the same attitude should be there, except with the sort of the little caveat that's like, hey, by the way, if you're on fire, you can come stay in our house.
Well, that's a great point. Tony Altimore, at TJ Altimore on Twitter. Follow him. He's got great stuff. He puts that all the time, and has been a great resource. Tony, great to talk to you, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right. There you go. So finally, we